Hey everyone. Okay, this is part 2 of my response to Some Truth. So let's get into it. So last we left, Some Truth had given us an example. Take a typical family, maybe mom, dad, and a kid, and the mom and dad are very loving, the kid's growing up in a nice environment. And then for whatever selfish reasons, the mom takes the kid and goes and marries some other guy, a really selfish prick that only wishes to exploit the family. And he asks, how do you think this would make the kid feel? How do you think that would help its development? If we can deduce that growing up in a loving environment is a positive thing, and if we can say that, which is, I think, true, then we can say moving to a neglectful environment or an exploitive environment would have a negative impact on the child. So there's my answer. I think it would have a negative impact. And to go further with that, if the child was old enough to have a memory of the father, old enough to maybe develop some sort of attachment, that child might feel neglected or abandoned when they're removed from that circumstance. If they were growing up with someone and then they were just taken away and introduced to this new person, I doubt they would have the same similar kind of bond. I doubt they would feel very appreciated in that case. So, that being said, I think that maybe we should put some more emphasis on relationships, or I guess family bonds and relations. The only problem is, we can say I support a strong family, but you can't say that without then supporting what your idea of a family is. You have this ideal of who people should be, and you want people to become that ideal, and I don't want people to become whatever strange ideal I want. I want people to be who they are. And I want people to realize that you don't need to be instantly satisfied, or you don't need to move on to be happy. You can be happy with what you have. You can be happy with yourself, and if you find someone that you're really happy with, then you don't have to move on. You don't have to need other people. And so I guess that really does strike a chord with me, because there are some selfish people out in the world. And, yeah, I guess maybe they feel like moving on or finding a new husband with a better job or something like that, or maybe a hot trophy wife or something like that. Maybe they feel that's what they need, and obviously that's not what they need. I still want to argue this, at least on two different levels, an atheist and even a theistic level. On the atheist level, I will argue that there's no way that we can ever really interpret those kind of rules. There's no way we can ever descend any natural law that wouldn't be what we have, that wouldn't be our interpretation of it. And if it's our interpretation of it, it can be flawed. We know that there are several different religions. We know that each of them have their own different laws and moral conducts. And it's almost as if these moral conducts and laws are really just cultural things. They're not really religious things. Most of the writings come from typical behavior back in the day. We change, we grow, even as a species we change and grow, and the law should reflect that. And I just don't feel that any one static set of rules could ever do it, could ever accomplish this task. And especially because if we're getting them from interpretation on books that are relatively quite old, there's no way we will find rules that fit us. I mean, I guess you can argue that these rules are established to make a static sense of humanity, that we will never grow out of these rules, and we will never grow, and therefore these rules will always apply to us, and we'll always have a good situation where everyone's peachy keen, right? Well, the fact that we are cutting off our growth, and the fact that we are stagnating, that we will never evolve from this set of rules, I think that's in of itself a bad thing. I think, okay, well before, when we mention the child, we can say that child would grow up in a negative environment. And I also go on to say, if that child had a memory, it would be worse, because that child had a loving family and is now in an exploitive family, and it's much worse. It's much worse when you have something and you know it for a little bit and it's taken away from you. But anyway, so on a theistic level, I don't think the laws are really supposed to apply to society. I don't think the rules that we interpret are supposed to be applied, are supposed to replace our rules. And maybe that's not what you're arguing, and if so, then I think we can agree on it. But that these rules are laws that the individual should uphold, and that we should avoid having a theocracy. Because, you know, death and being allowed through the gates of heaven, that's an individual thing. You're not judged collectively. You're judged on an individual basis. And if you hang around with a bunch of people and they're all Christians and they obey the rules, and you figure, okay, well, I'll obey the rules too, that doesn't really make you righteous. That just means you're really good at following the crowd. And that's not really what it's about. It's about separating yourself from the crowd and following these rules, even though you might be sad, even though it might be a hard journey, a hard path. And that's what sets you apart. Because you're willing to take the hard route. You're willing to obey these rules no matter what. You're willing to put your faith into it. You're willing to put your faith into it, and that's what sets you apart. And when society applies those rules and forces everyone to obey those rules, you're not being set apart. You have to apply those rules to yourself, and you should strive to not apply those rules to anyone else, because they have to figure it out. Now, in closing, I'll refer to the child in the first bit of this video. As time goes on, and this child grows up in a neglectful environment, obviously we don't want that. We might want to make rules to stop that from happening. Maybe we sympathize with this child, and maybe we think, hey, that's not fair. Maybe I went through a similar experience, or maybe I would not want this child to grow up in a neglectful environment. But I'll remind you of one thing. You made a video back, Sumtruth, and it was good and greatness. It was of good and greatness. And you described a lot of things can be good, but few things can be great. If this child continued to grow in this environment and went through struggles and went through hell and back because of these awful things, feeling neglected, maybe grows up feeling like it's worthless and that it doesn't mean anything. And the fact that you can go from one of those situations, and that's still, even though you grew up in a neglected environment, even though you grew up in an exploitive environment, you don't have to feel worthless. And you don't have to feel neglected your entire life. Because you can grow. You can continue on. You can climb that hill, and you can find your self-worth. Even though maybe you had a loving family before and you've been ripped from it and there's no going back, you can go through that struggle and you can come out all the better for it. You don't have to be worthless just because you grew up in a worthless environment. You can find yourself. And that's what it is to truly be great. Because if you were born into a loving family and you grew up and you started off and you had a decent self-worth and you never had to go through these struggles, then hey, you're a good person. But if you had these struggles and if you grew up in a bad environment and you came out on top, you came out just as good as those other kids, that makes you great. Because you're better for that trial. You're better for those challenges. You're a better person because you've been there. You've been to that valley of shadows and you've come out on top.